well, can you use blogs like Memokraat in the future as a way of doing that similar kind of ideological positioning without getting your own hands, so to say, dirty?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Siim. That was a long question, wasn't it? Yes. All right. So I'm now free to pick up whatever the first is. I'm ready to answer. And the one I'd like to pick up is a little bit. Well, Siim, we've been talking about what Google and Facebook and the other super servers are doing in this market and what they're not. And if you claim that they take half of the advertising money from the market, you and I know that they even don't pay taxes in this country. Neither do they give any information. Neither do they belong any of to our professional organizations like the marketeers organizations or the advertisers organizations. So we don't know actually how much the Yankees take. We know that they are not part of our tax organization. Neither is Amazon the part of the Estonian tax organization. So our guests might see our tax authorities keenly going after shop attendants and people on construction sites, but the super servers, they even don't declare how much they do. I hope it's much less than half of the advertising money for now, but we just don't know. I think they operate from Ireland or from some other offshore. Because it concerned my business so intimately, so I picked this one up. Then second, do or don't we represent the reality, or do we rather produce our own reality in the media? It's a topic of my longer lecture. You're welcome to listen to one of those. I'm giving one a year at Tartu University Media Studies. But I tended to be a good student of Moderator, who again taught us the theory of Jürgen Habermas, Adorno, the other Frankfurt School philosophers. But now I have turned my mind actually. I think that we are creating media. We are not actually reporting media, representing media. Media, as my colleague Jakob Sheikh very well put during our first half of the day, is creating its own sort of media. Our media, I don't know, Jakob, did you say that you have 75% of male photos in the newspapers? We have 80% the photos, the photographs represented in newspapers. They are of male objects. It used to be 90. Do you know when? When we had the singing revolution, 1989. Because men were making politics. Now I belong to an organization, an association of large entrepreneurs. We have 100% men there. So how do we represent the society? So we get the elites making up their own mind of what the public, the voter, thinks, and they are creating their own reality. And so are we in the media. I'm being self-critical here, but that's from me for now.
I would say that most of the election choices, the questions that are put up are not being, they don't come up in the last month or so. They're being brought up, let's say, in the half a year before that, when people still listen. In the last month, I would say that they don't listen. It's purely emotional based or sort of reaction, like self-aggregation, like mobilizing around some symbols, but not much of a well thought out debate. But in the months that there were previous months, in the, let's say, 5 months of the 6-month campaign period, there are some questions brought up by the political parties. Do you think that media is more of a vessel for them, or is an equal partner in the changing the public opinion?
Thank you very much. This question was slightly shorter. I regard myself as still a young man. I have a 1.5-year-old son at home But if I think that during my activities at Ekspress, Eesti Ekspress and Ekspress Grupp, I am now currently seeing the 15th government changing. It is the 15th for me now. I tend to be less emotional about this, and I'll tell you what. As an exception from what media is, I perceive the political organizations, particularly the usual coalition partner parties, as fight organizations. And they tend to be more like this the further on the election campaign goes. And then they address you. They don't have this habit here anymore, but we are the largest internet media in Lithuania and in Latvia. They address our editors-in-chief there, asking them, who are they supporting? Are you with us or are you against us? And then here, if our good investigative journalists attack the political parties about corruption, then they come back to you and say, aren't you corrupt, the news organization? But let me ask you one question, my countrymates. When did you last time hear any case of corruption inside Estonian media organizations? I mean, to be more precise, a journalist taking a bribe, reporting for a bribe and caught red-handed. Come on, everyone. When did you hear last time? Have you heard politicians taking cash money? Were many politicians of the ruling party in this city, the Central Party, caught, arrested, and sued, and did their time in jail for corrupt activities? Whereas, yes, they were caught actually reading cash money in their cabinets 2 kilometers from here. And they especially the mayor of our city, comes up with this very philosophical thesis. Isn't corruption our general problem here? No, it's not.
I would love to go on to Czech. Like from the Danish perspective, do you think that your political arena, so to say, is more of split among the party lines, or like is this future that you were describing with following certain respectable journalists, is this a future where the ones that you're following have declared their personal ideological background, or more of they try to stand away from it and be as neutral as possible?
Thank you for the question. Is anybody asleep down there?
No, is everybody awake?
Hey!
You should ask if everybody is awake.
Thank you for stay tuned. And also thank you, Mr. Levy, for a wonderful speech before. Well, I don't know how it is in Estonia, but in Denmark, the media tend to be neutral. I mean, we divide very strictly between news and views. At my newspaper, we are following a sort of a cultural radical leftist ideology on the views plan, but in terms of news, no, we're neutral. We tend to be as neutral as possible. Can you be entirely neutral? No, of course you can't. But you can. I mean, I've made several stories that would favor a political party that I am not voting at myself. So I'm definitely neutral as far as I'm concerned. But there is a sort of a tendency in Denmark. I don't know how it is in Estonia, but there is a tendency toward journalists being more their own name than the name of the company. And some of them might share their own views on Facebook and Twitter and so on and so forth. I don't personally, because if I share my own personal views, I don't think I would be perceived as an objective person. I know that I'm trying to be objective, but some people might accuse me of, not dividing my personal views and my views as a journalist.
The follow-up question would be going to Gideon Levy. Do you think that the media inside Israel, do you think that it's split among the party lines? Do you think that the way how the media covers certain events or suppresses certain identities, do you think that it helps gather the political movement, to mobilize their bases, and to actually allow them to continue the policy that they have been using.
The media in Israel went through basic changes along the lines that also the Israeli society went through basic changes. I still remember the joke, maybe some of you remember the joke, that 2 Israelis share 3 views.
It's about Estonians also.
Okay, yeah, so maybe the comparison is a fair comparison between Estonia and Israel. But in Israel right now, 3 Israelis hardly share 1 view, and 3 newspapers hardly share 1 view, and the view is always the view of the majority of the mainstream. But it's not only about sharing 1 view, it's also about lack of tolerance to alternative views. The Israeli media of today, we will not go through the history, but today almost all of the Israeli media, both printed and broadcasted, is in private hands, is commercial, has very little ideology, very little. At the same time, it's a very free media. There are hardly pressures, if at all, from the government, from the army, from the secret services, almost nothing. I can tell you that I never faced pressures from the army, from the government, never ever, even not in a hint, as a hint. But what Israel's media is facing is something which is much worse than governmental censorship, and this is self-censorship. Because self-censorship never creates resistance, while governmental censorship, I guess you know it in your country from the past, self-censorship creates some kind of resistance. Governmental censorship. Self-censorship is voluntarily. And having very little ideology, the Israeli media, almost all of it, except of my newspaper, which is really a lighthouse in the darkness of Israeli media, and I'm sorry to say so. I'm not trying to sell here subscriptions, even though it would be very nice if you do, you know. We have our work days and we need all your money. What I really mean is that the Israeli media recruited itself, not in the service of the government, in the service of the readership. It's not about pleasing the government or the army, by all means not. It's about pleasing the readers and the viewers. It's about not bothering them with things they don't want to see or don't want to hear or don't want to read. It's about telling them only what will make them happy or fearful or hatred. You know, emotions are selling so good. Fears are selling wonderful. Any kind of emotions. Hatred is also quite a good campaign. While the opposite side is not selling. I wrote one article, sorry for talking about myself, I wrote one article in the beginning of this war in Gaza about the Israeli pilots and their accountability towards their crimes in Gaza. My newspaper lost 2,000 subscribers because of it. And this is a huge number for my newspaper, which is really struggling for its existence. Like many other newspapers, but my newspaper is very influential, but very small. 2,000 people had cancelled their subscription because of this article. What publisher wants it? What publisher wants to deal with it, wants to confront with it? And I can assure you that the stuff that I write would have never been published in any other newspaper in Israel. And this media is betraying its professional mission. Let's not talk about ideology and politics, but professionality. Is it really professional not to tell the Israelis how does Gaza look after this war? Is it really professional not to tell the Israel to hide from them the horrible scenes in Gaza? They were in the Israeli media, sure they were, but as a lip service. And part of us who are journalists know what does it mean editing. If you put the same story in the front page or in page 15, if it opens the news or it's in the end of the news, if you give faces and names and all kind of human signs, or you just write numbers and figures, we know all this. So ignoring this, only not to bother the readership, is betraying our professional duty. Nothing to do with ideology. Many Israelis were very happy about what's happening in Gaza. And others would maybe be shocked. I still think that the majority of Israelis would have been shocked if they really would have been exposed to what Israel had done there. But not telling them is betraying our mission, is betraying our profession, the most professional standards. And that's my main blame toward the Israeli media. To this I want to add, because I can talk about it and talk. The Israeli media is, as I said in the former session, the biggest collaborator of the occupation in the way that it is maintaining this dehumanizing campaign over years of the Palestinians. I can give so many examples, but we will not get to it. By not covering the occupation, by covering it really in a twisted way, by telling half-truths, by avoiding a lot of truths, by not asking the right questions about the crimes and about those who are responsible for those crimes. The Israeli media is even collaborating with the occupation, and I think, Jakob, you were talking about words. The Israeli media voluntarily adopted all the laundry machinery of the occupation language, of the occupation establishment. There was never a title in Israeli media, Israeli soldier killed today a child of 6. It will be always, if it will be at all, a child of 6 was killed today. He died out of his wounds. It will be never the opposite way. And all the terminology which, civil administration, as a laundry of word to brutal military occupation. You name it. I can really give here tens and tens of concepts, of perceptions, of words, which are never the right one. Administrative detention. I remember once a senior editor in Haaretz asked me, what is administrative detention? It is detention in better conditions, right? But administrative detention is detention without a trial. That's the real way to call it. But Israel, who never knew even how to call the occupied territories, and called it in the beginning liberated territories. Palestinians are so grateful for this liberation. They don't stop to be grateful, and rightly so. Even the word occupation is a new word in Israeli media. Only in the recent years it became more or less politically correct. You heard before, Judea and Samaria. That's the real name. West Bank, Palestinian. By all means not. And then it goes to who is a terrorist, obviously. When you see all those ISIL terrible scenes, cutting citizens' throats, many times I say, let's go back to a war in which only knives will be allowed. Sure, it looks brutal. Sure, when a pilot is sitting in a helicopter and pushes a button and releases a bomb of 1,000 kilos and kill 20, 30 children, this looks not so brutal. So terrorists are always the Palestinians, always. Israel is never a terrorist, the state is not a terrorist, and so forth and so forth. Those are ongoing campaigns. We are not dealing here with 1 year or 1 day. They are deep-rooted, and it's very, very, very hard to fight against those machineries because they are so effective. And yes, I think today that thanks to Israeli media, most of Israeli public opinion is deeply brainwashed, much more than anyone can even imagine himself.
Shortly to Jakob.
I think it's very important for us to understand that if we have to deal on a good basis with these conflicts around the world, we need to start by ourselves. It's not a question of covering the Middle East, it's a question of how Estonian media is covering domestic issues, how we're framing basic concepts as us and them, how Danish media is doing the same thing, how Swedish media, how Finnish media is doing the same thing. So when we alienate the strangers, then, I mean, it doesn't surprise me that we're not, covering the events of strangers very, neutral or even with nuances. Thanks for sharing your wonderful pictures, by the way. And they I guess they add different grades to the events as they unfold. I just want to mention that it's very important that we focus on the basic concepts within our own countries before discussing at all what happened in the Middle East. And I want to ask you, Mr. Levy, one question. You say that you don't face pressure from politicians or from other parts of society. Do you ever face pressure from your editors, or do other Israeli journalists not appointed at Haaretz face pressure, like editors telling them to reframe their stories?
And public opinion also. Do you have a pressure for public opinion as well?
Pressure from public opinion brought me to
because I know Israelis that they are very, very straight
Yeah.
to
But
their
my question
own
is regarding
stereotyping and deep-rooted cultures.
Right. So first of all, I want to contribute also to the praises for your photographies, for your photos. They are really amazing. Really, and when you see those photos, you think that we journalists are really unnecessary, because it's enough to see those photos, and after this, you are really speechless. And I really think they are amazing. Really, they left me with a very, very deep impression. And I saw some photos from Syria and still. Coming back to your question, I never faced any kind of pressure, neither from my editors nor from my publisher, which is even more important than this. Not only no pressure, but full support. But it's very, very unusual and very, very rare. And it really is thanks to the spirit of Haaretz, which is going on like this for over 90 years of real liberalism and freedom, which I can't see any other example, for sure not in Israeli media, when the publisher, after 2,000 cancellation, tells you please go on, and when people are calling him and telling him we can't go on with this writing of Gideon Levy, he says, so read another newspaper. Haaretz is not for you. That's his answer. When his newspaper is really struggling for its existence, literally. So I gain a total freedom, and it couldn't happen in any other newspaper. There is no other journalist in Israel who writes like me, I'm afraid to say, except of my colleagues in Haaretz. But in no other newspaper you can see those views or those stories, because it's not only about the views, it's mainly about the stories. Views you can read everywhere, the same views, and you know as much as I know that views and opinion pages are really not making the change. The change is through the flow of information in the news. As for public opinion, look, if I had to go with a bodyguard in the war for 1 month, so you can imagine yourself that there is some pressure of the public opinion, but it's not effective enough because I continue.
I would love to go on now to Estonia, or back to Estonia. I would propose that there are, let's say, roughly and really broadly, two kinds of politicians. The ones that try to find the sort of group that is coming together and try to be the leader of that or stand in front of it, and the others who don't really look around to search a group, but try to organize a group behind them about the views that they really hold there. Like, you are a politician, Jevgeni, and actually quite impressive one. So, would you say that in the cooperation that politicians have with media, the way how political campaigns are being run and organized and mobilized, do you see that media would allow more of these society-changing politicians to actually put forth their views, or is it more of a rare event?
I'm relatively skeptical about a lot of things that have been said about societal change being brought about by rational arguments. If I ever do a PhD, which I plan to do at some point, it would be on the role of aesthetics in politics. I start a little bit further, but I'll try to be brief. Where I at some point back a few years ago when I lived in the UK, I remember a debate on the extinction of species, and at the time a polar bear cub was born in Berlin zoo called Knut, who is now dead. But as a result of that, everybody was talking in the media about how polar bears are dying out, and it's really a huge tragedy, and I don't know what the hell we should do about it. And at the same time, there was a much more muted debate about tuna fish dying, which will happen pretty soon. And nobody really cared because tuna fish is ugly, and polar bears are quite cute. So, talking about rational arguments being somehow basis for political action, I believe in that less and less. In Estonian political campaigns, nobody bothers to write these kinds of pieces that are published in Memokraat that Tarmo is working on. It's just not worth the effort. Maybe 15 to 20% of the electorate actually read arguments. Most follow pictures of various sorts. So in this, I think I've, in my political work, have realized that this is a trend that is impossible to change. Thus, I've started to use pictures myself. It's much easier.
Thank you for the honest answer. But I would want to go on. Do you think that the campaigns that are splitting the society to get the mobilization behind the politicians, to get the basis, do you see more of them happening because of their effectiveness, or is there some sort of way how media could actually lessen the effect of this identity politics in that sense?
No, absolutely. Of course, it's much easier to come up with pictures of separation because they are usually based on already deeply ingrained prejudices. Some call them values, and it is absolutely much more easier to mobilize people around them than to try to change what people already believe. Because changing that also means the attempt to change the imagery, and it's very difficult. I mean, trying to bridge, I don't know, Estonians and Russians in Estonia is very difficult because everything that is linked to Russia automatically brings up the picture of Vladimir Putin. And it's very difficult to disentangle it. It's much easier to either, try to be Putin yourself on the local scale, or try to carry on demonizing everything that is linked to him and things that he does. and as a result getting some kind of political clout on the other side. Being in the middle is obviously much more difficult because there is no clear and nice image there. Or maybe I haven't found it, I don't know.
I would like to ask my colleagues about one particular fact which happened here in Estonia during this very, very hot week of debates of sexual freedom versus traditional families. And it also concerns you, dear colleague Tarmo. And you know, we have different ways of being demagogical. One way is argumentum ad hominem, who are you to ask me? Second is argumentum ad crumina, this guy must be truthful because he's rich. And then there's one more, which was used in Memokraat and which was used in the parliament, which is argumentum ad Hitlerum. We had a very, an extremely talented Estonian actor who is currently in Munich, Germany. He wrote a very sincere piece about his homosexuality, and all of a sudden, in the way called Memokraat, which you're part of, he accused his counterpart, Mr. Varro Vooglaid, the activist for traditional families and whatnot, in having a black moustache and talking about Aryan race. A guy called Imre Sooäär did the same from parliament speaking point. He told that the Estonian parliament received lots of names with swastikas on them and theses about traditional family. Would you, dear colleagues, or would you not censor this type of argumentum ad Hitlerum from a civilized exchange, or wouldn't you?
Well, since the question was to me, I'll answer it, but I'll come to it in a little bit roundabout way, because it ties into the discussion we've been having here for the last at least quarter an hour or 20 minutes. And as Jevgeni was mentioning, the connection between the politics and the aesthetics, then this sort of immediately called to my mind the famous essay by Walter Benjamin, and actually also relates to this thing that Hans, you were bringing up before about the Adorno and Habermas. So Adorno and Habermas were writing in the aftermath of a long project of political aestheticization, which went pretty bad. And has something to do with the argumentum of Hitler and what you mentioned. They were also critical about the rational argument, so this is also true. But it's a very complicated thing and a very complicated terrain we're working on. So I think this is not something we can probably somehow untangle here in this panel. But now coming back to this question about this particular piece that was published this Monday in Memokraat blog. Well, it achieved a very wide readership in Estonia. I think a lot of people probably also in this room have read it. And when the piece, it was written as an immediate reaction to the demonstration that took place on Sunday morning. So I received this piece, I think 8 o'clock at night on Sunday. And as Hans was saying, it was written very, very personally. It was written. The first draft was, I'd say a relative mess. So what we did was me, myself, and Eero Äppner, whom many of you probably know, we edited this piece throughout the night. So we bounced about 3 drafts between each other. And I can tell you that references to Hitler and Putin were taken out in the first one. So we took it out immediately because we knew that once this goes out, then a guy like Hans will come in with flags waving and saying that this is argumentum ad Hitlerum and this will go nowhere. So this was immediately what we took out. We also corrected the flow. We tried to make it more of this sort of a thing that would to keep it very personal as it was supposed to be, but make it something that could be reasonably published in a newspaper. And then I think my last revision went out at 4 o'clock at night. So I said, okay, fine, we'll put it up in the morning, and I set myself an alarm clock for 8 o'clock, so to be ready to put it up. And then I got up, and Eero had written me. He had spoken to Jüristo, the guy who wrote the piece, and they had agreed that no, let's publish it the way he wrote it. And it was a very conscious decision because again, it was a long piece. It was about 22,000 characters, so it's a long form certainly. And it was very, very personal. It was jumbled at pieces, and then we didn't correct the flow. We kept it as it was, and this was for a very particular reason. And this now comes back to what Mr. Levy was saying before, is that although I'm slightly more optimistic than Jevgeni about the way whether opinions can actually make the world better, or reasoned argument can make the world better, but I also am a firm believer in the power of stories. And this was the story. This was the story that we chose not to doctor. We chose not to plaster over. And if that guy, Jüristo, I have no reason to believe that he doesn't know what's Argumentum of Hitler. So he didn't put it in there as a mistake that he didn't know what happens. So we decided to keep it there. And then, as Hans well knows, what happened next was that the piece was also published in unchanged, unaltered way in Postimees, which is the main daily, by 12 o'clock. So we published it at 8. By 12 it went out in Postimees, and by 3 or 3:30 it went out in Delfi and Estonian Päevaleht. And by 12 o'clock, the same time as it was published in Postimees, we had an email from Alar Dankler, who asked whether they can publish the same piece, unaltered, unchanged, in the newspaper that's owned by Hansas Luik on my right. So it was a very conscious decision, and it was done very deliberately. Whether it was moral, whether it's something where you could or should take the discussion to whether you could use these things, I mean, I think this is something that we have to debate, but it didn't happen by chance. It was a conscious decision for this particular case.
I would actually want to move on from that specific. Do you think that the identities, in this case the sexual minorities, or in the case of Denmark, the New Danes, or in some other minorities, for example, the almost 1 million citizens of Israel that are not Jewish. Is that roughly correct? I think. Do you think that they will keep on to their identities in that kind of media climate? Are they able to do that, or should they sort of make their own little corners where they can keep talking about the things that interest them, and in the wider media they're sort of underrepresented and swallowed up?
I don't see why one thing excludes the other. I mean, why can't they keep certain cultural values and language and traditions for themselves and share other with the greater community? I myself, we just celebrated Eid back home, which is a Muslim holiday, and I don't consider myself very Muslim. I mean, but that's a Pakistani tradition that I keep celebrating because of my family. But I really also celebrate Christmas because that's a Danish tradition, and I don't see one thing excluding the other. These groups are very diverse. They consist of many different people, and my major point today is just that we have to, in the media, accept that they are so very diverse, and not just when it comes to disabled people, not just people in wheelchairs. When it comes to ethnic minority groups, not just men with long beards. They don't look like each other, just like we don't look like each other. Today the panel looked very much like each other. I don't know if you mentioned, if you're aware, like it's 5 minutes in sort of the same age, and when people look alike, their viewpoints may look alike, and this is what I'm afraid of. By the way, I'd much rather hear the questions from some of the audience as well, because you're the diversity out there, we're not.
would you follow that with Gideon? Could you give your representative your opinion on that? We'll go on straight after this question about the way how the non-Jewish view is represented in Israeli media. Like the ones that are citizens, the ones who are diverse, but how much or how big is their effect in Israeli media? How much can they talk out? How much can they represent their viewpoints?
The other day there was an interview with one member of parliament who is an Israeli Palestinian, a citizen of Israel, and he's a doctor, he's a physician, and the interviewer asked him, Dr. TV, you have to decide, what are you, Palestinian or a doctor? So that's more or less the attitude that how the Israeli Palestinians, the Israeli citizens in Israel and the Israeli media, whenever there is a crime committed by a Palestinian, it will always say that it was a Palestinian, while if it would be a Jew, it will never be mentioned, obviously. It will always be that Palestinian intellectuals will be interviewed, if at all, only about the Palestinians. It will never be an interview with a Palestinian about philosophy, even though there are Palestinian philosophers, or literature, or physics, or medicine. It will always be about their niche. And the Israeli-Palestinian community is going through changes, many changes. They are now the third generation after the Nakba. The first generation was totally traumatized and paralyzed and collaborated with Israel out of terrible fear because they lost everything and they didn't know where they are going to. But now we face a third generation which is much more self-confident, articulate, many times even arrogant as they should be. And I think that one more generation and they will not let things remain as they are. They also speak perfect Hebrew, many times much better Hebrew than we Jewish Israelis speak. And I think this should be followed, and it will be reflected also in the way that they will be covered in the media, because they will not let go, continue to be second-rate citizens forever. And it's really fascinating to see. They, by the way, they are not only the only group, obviously, the only minority which is totally absent or totally biased in Israeli media. We have the asylum seekers, the African ones, which the coverage of them is also almost criminal, the way that they are covered in the entire Israeli media. And we have also in the Jewish community the tension between the Ashkenazi Jews and the Mizrahi Jews, the Jews who come from European countries and the Jews who come from Arab countries. But that's the reason for another lecture and another invitation for me to come here. But if I may, I would like to ask the minister, why do you stay in politics if things are so irrational?
No, I still believe that it's possible to bring about change. It's just a matter of realizing what is the sociological mechanism behind that change. And I think there has been too much of sort of rationalistic, theoretical bias behind politics and behind sort of all social and public discussions, that we have to win the big rational argument, but it's usually either useless or not possible, because those arguments are, most of those arguments are based on prejudices on both sides. Some of those prejudices are called values, and at the same time most of the electorate is not listening. They're just not listening. So you have to find different ways of doing that.
Hello, my name is Jevgeni, and I have a few questions to our education minister. Since education is your field, and what you just talked about, that you have to somehow change the way we look at rationale, and I completely agree that ultimately people do decide based on emotions rather than rational arguments if they are against their identity. So we also talked about panelists as well about the language of pictures and images, and if we cannot have this debate or education based on rational arguments, how can we use maybe the language of images then to shift the mindset in whatever direction you want? And maybe also some other things.
But in that, I think most people who are working in this field, either from the civil society or the political part, know that very well. Look at the hopefully something that has now ended for some time, i.e. this civic partnership issue. I think that at the beginning a lot of people were trying to appeal to the very fundamental value judgments like equal treatments, equal rights, equal opportunities. But I think really where a lot of people were much more convinced when those for it started putting up images of concrete stories of concrete people. That also worked conversely from the other side. They started to use images as well. And I think it worked from the both sides. The fact that final vote in the parliament went in one direction or the other, that is irrelevant really. That is very important, but irrelevant to the point that I'm making. That is, with variety of images employed, both sides managed to mobilize their people behind their cause. In my own, for example, political work, I like this one case where I've been talking about the fact that we have 90,000 people without citizenship in Estonia. There are about maybe 3 or 4 countries in the world who have more. There's Syria, Thailand, Myanmar, Nepal, maybe a few more. And this is, of course, if you look from a international perspective, or indeed from a sort of value perspective, this is completely abnormal. But this argument is impossible to sell in Estonian society. Nobody really cares. But once you bring up concrete images, then things might have, you might win a little debate. And that's something that I, for example, managed to accomplish with one concrete case in Kohtla-Järve where the state wanted to take the Estonian citizenship from one girl, 13-year-old girl, and I managed to create a sort of social imagery where there were photos of that particular person. She was sad and she was a nice person, and everybody felt like, oh, we shouldn't take citizenship from her, she's so nice. And it worked. If I just appealed to I don't know, international norms, morality or whatever, nothing would have happened. Nothing, absolutely nothing.
Questions? Daria.
Question to Jevgeni. I have a question to Jevgeni about school education system and bilingual system in Estonia. How ready we are the situation that our school could become really international. I'm mother of bilingual kids, and they all study in Estonian school. They all have the same problem. Several times I was asking to choose who they are. Are they Russian or are they Estonian, or doesn't matter. I have the same situation with the French friends, but also kids in Estonian school. So are we? You need to choose French or Estonian, and do you have any plans? Also, I know now that several people who try to immigrate to Estonia, they are really wanting to integrate this trade. They are ready, for example, to put kids in Estonian school, but they have 0 level of Estonian. For example, my middle daughter, she finished school in Japan, in Japanese language, and when she came to Japan, there was a special program. She studied only Japanese for 6 months, do you have any future possibility that we have the same situation in Estonia, that any person in any age who came, that he could learn the local language for 6 months and then study education in Estonia?
I think that there are a couple of different aspects to what you asked. I think mostly the majority of Estonian society equates integration with assimilation. So that's one of the problems, and that is also, I think, a problem in which you can either be Estonian or non-Estonian. It's not possible to be Estonian with some kind of cultural or other difference. It's for a very simple reason that Estonian identity is very closed. So, for example, most of the people in Narva, in which I do most of my political work, when people are asked whether they're Estonian or Russian, they say they're from Narva. So we are basically getting back to the 19th century identities. In 19th century, usually, of course, people replied to that question by saying, which one do you want me to be? Depending on who was asking. I think one of the problems there is that people in Narva do not actually feel Russian in the sense that Russians are across the border. But at the same time, there is no middle identity which would allow them to be Estonian with some difference. So this is something that have been talked about for some time, that there should be a Russian-Estonian identity, and that would be socially accepted by both sides. And there is no such identity. It is just not accepted by the majority of the Estonian population and by the majority of Russian-speaking population either. Concerning the language studies in schools or otherwise for immigrants, then this is, I think, a little bit too technical. We can talk about it later. I won't take any time here.
Tarmo, sul oli mingi comment?
Well, maybe perhaps I'll just add something to this this first question about what can we teach in the school, or how can we sort of help people argue about things in a way. And I just thought that I think that there are actually arguments that can be won by rational argument, and this is something also that was. Even in, again, Estonians might know that I had this televised debate with Varro Vooglaid just, was it this week or was it last week? This week. Last week, yeah. And I'm sort of a little bit, these days are a little hazy. And this is where it was quite clear that we were arguing to different audiences. So he was trying to appeal to people whom he hoped would come to a demonstration on Sunday morning. I was trying to make my appeal to these 101 people who had to press the button on Tuesday and on Wednesday. So we were talking somewhat in somewhat different languages, although we were actually talking to each other and answering the same questions. So this is one thing. Then there are arguments which I think can be won or contested on the basis of rhetorics. And this is where I would say that in Estonian schools, this particular skill or this particular tradition is taught way too little. So the way how you can present your arguments, whether rational or emotional, so there are always different ways of doing this. And then of course there are cases that can be won by appeal to polar bear cops or sad little girls or gays who were kicked in nuts as when they were young. So, and if it's your call often to make that distinction, to choose which way you want to go. And I think they are just different options.
I would actually want to go on just for a moment to Gideon. Do you think that the different kind of audiences that, for example, I would propose that Hamas was trying to get the victim look and the sympathy vote from the Western audience, and for example, the Israeli government might have been more inclined to about the abilities and the possibilities about demolishing the tunnels and reducing the military structures that have been brought up. Do you think that these kind of different levels, different objectives that are being pursued at the same time, how does media bring these together, and do they show that these kind of differences happen, like that both can win or lose at the same time?
I think the Israeli media, maybe the media all over the world, but mainly the Israeli media, is working much more in the recent years on emotions rather than rational questions like the one you just mentioned. And it's working also in many ways on entertainment more than fulfilling its job. The Israelis were told in the beginning of the war in Gaza that it's all about the rockets. And as long as the rockets continue, the war will continue, and once the rocket will stop, the war will stop. And then 2-3 weeks later, the Israelis were told by the government, through the media, that it's all about the tunnels. And the tunnels all of a sudden became an existential danger for the state of Israel. And the media competed one the other, who will describe a more horror vision of those tunnels. Will they appear in the middle of a kindergarten of a kibbutz? Or will they appear in the dining room of the kibbutz? And all of a sudden, for a few weeks, this was an existential threat to the state of Israel, a regional superpower which possesses any weapon in the world. And once this was over, right now nobody talks anymore about the tunnels. The tunnels are totally forgotten, and we are already in the next danger. When I left 2 days ago, the main danger was the flu, and I'm sure, and it was main headlines. Ebola we don't have yet, even not as an imaginative threat, but flu can sell for 2 days some kind of...
Especially if it's a Palestinian flu.
Palestinian flu, yeah. No, flu goes only for human beings. you cannot get it from animals. In any case, it's really more about manipulating fears, threats, and less, and always adopting, and this is so terrible, always adopting the official view without asking questions, without putting doubts. Now, don't be mistaken, in other fields, the Israeli media is very critical. The Israeli media, with its investigations, brought a president to jail because of rape, brought a prime minister who is on his way to jail because of corruption, a minister of finance who was serving already 5 years in jail. 3 officers, high officers in the police are now on their way to jail, all thanks to really courageous investigations of the Israeli media. But those investigations please the readership, so why not? But once it goes to the direction that they don't please the readership, then the media is paralyzed. So in other words, the real revolution in Israeli media, maybe in world media, is that from now on the readers are the real editors and the real bosses of the media. And this, in my view, is very dangerous.
Questions?
Hello. After listening to the panels, I feel pessimistic. And the first thing that comes to my head, and these are things that you've all mentioned really, it seems to me that the idea of journalism has become obsolete, and the newspaper that you work for seems like paradise really, and it seems like the only place really where journalistic work could be done seriously. But my question now is this: that even though everybody here has something to do with journalism, and everybody on this panel feels that, I think at least everybody on this panel feels that through journalism you can maybe what's the word I'm looking for? Not express, but you can achieve some sort of rational debate and then come to rational conclusions. Otherwise, none of you would be involved or in the job that you're doing. Of course, one of the comments you said, Mr. Levy, which I found really interesting and which is, I believe, is completely true, is the comment that you made. I'm not sure, I don't know the name, but that the pictures that were taken make it seem as if all of these articles are unnecessary. So my question here is how to salvage this profession, and is it even worth salvaging really at the end of the day? And even though after everybody speaks in Europe especially, or in the Western world about the idea of having freedom of speech, but isn't this becoming maybe more of a hindrance? Because everybody has the freedom to say whatever it is that they want. So it's and also it was mentioned that now people choose. It's not even a matter of, we tend to go towards the opinions that suit us and the opinions that amuse us and the opinions that we're not looking for the truth anymore. And if you are looking for the truth, then a newspaper would certainly not be the place to look for it. So my question is this now, that how do you see your future and is there a future even? Thank you.
Where's the truth?
First of all, there is a basic difference between Paradise and my newspaper. And this is that Paradise pays good salaries and my newspaper doesn't. At least that's the way I want to believe, that at least in Paradise I get what I deserve in terms of money. But I was joking. I just want to answer also one serious sentence, because the question is very, very important. I think we are now in a transition era between one kind of journalism to another kind, and we don't know how it will end. In many terms, you can compare it to the Arab Spring. We are now in the violent stage, but it doesn't mean that it will end up in one way or the other. It's very clear that the printed journalism is dying. It's a question of years. This primitive notion that you will cut trees in Brazil and produce paper in Finland or in Estonia and then send it and then print it and then bring it to the homes, and when it arrives at home it's yesterday news. This is ridiculous. This will not survive for many more years. On the other hand, this total anarchy in which any bloggist is today a journalist, and anything can be published without any hierarchy or professional standards. They published in one website a few months ago that my father was a collaborator with the Nazis. No newspaper would have ever published such a thing, and you can't stop it right now. There are so many things that are published, and the reader have no tools to know, to make the difference between real information, professional journalism, and just spreading rumors, and this is a very, very dangerous stage. But I believe that by the end of the day, the new technology will be used to revive, to really establish quality journalism, only with new technological tools, that's all.
I have 2 points. First of all, I don't agree with Mr. Levy. I think that there's a future for print journalism because of 2 things. First of all, you're right, people tend to seek what they would like to see. And this is actually the reason why newspapers are so important today. The neutral news is so important. Because you can go to Twitter, you can go to Facebook, you can go everywhere you want and find subjective news, not neutral news. So I think that there is a reason for us to be there. We also, I agree with the point that when our newspaper arrives, it's yesterday's news, which is why we are not, putting in the news of the newswire anymore. We're more like a magazine every day, adding perspective to what people see on Facebook and Twitter. So I sincerely believe that there is a future, and there is a need of a silent place where we can enjoy the perspective, we can enjoy your photos, and are not necessarily in a rush. Well, that said, I just want to make clear that I'm sad that you feel so pessimistic, because I'm actually quite optimistic. The news have never been better than today. The journalists have never been more, skillful than they are today. And I really do think that obviously there's challenges ahead. This is what I've been focusing on today. But so many things are already in place, and we see that things are getting better. The us and them concepts, for instance, in Denmark, is becoming less and less evident. And I was very depressed to hear a minister here saying that that rational arguments cannot bring about any change, because common sense in Denmark, by the media and by the public opinion, has actually brought about change. We're now not stigmatizing as much as we used to do.
Jevgeni, Tarmo tahab vastata.
Well, I'm actually not a journalist, so it's.
But you're a bloggist.
Well, if just to try and answer shortly, I sort of very much agree with what Mr. Levy said before, that I do think that we are in a transition, but I also think that it's far too early to speak of the demise of the paper journalism. I think there are interesting things happening also in paper journalism. But then again, I was just thinking in my mind with the thinking back to this particular piece that Hans brought up, which was published in the blog this Monday. If I'm not mistaken, then Estonian Ekspress this week's print run was about 30,000 copies, 32,000 or something like this.
That's right.
So, of course, it's true that more than one person reads single paper copy, but it's also true that not every person reads all the stories in the paper any particular time. And now I just looked 12 hours after we pushed the publish button on the blog. We had 17,000 unique readers with average time spent on page of about 9.5 minutes. And this was more than half of the print run within, before these guys got their shoelaces tied. Because the Eesti Ekspress is published on Wednesday, so it's 2 days later. And so you can use these technological tools. You can use, you can build audience. You can work with it in a number of different ways. But I don't think that these two things would be, contradictory. So they can be complementary. We can use the paper media as one of the tools, as one of the ways for leveraging the message.
By all means, I didn't mean to offend any bloggers.
No,
By all means, no.
No offense taken.
Okay.
Not taken.
Yes.
Thank you. It's hard to get a microphone. My name is Christina, and my question is to Mr. Levy. You were talking about losing your readers while you published an article that wasn't really so-called popular. And that made me think that who are your readers? Can you group them into some kind of social group, or are they this new generation that can bring the change through their common sense with you, or their view to the things in Israel? And is this a question of one generation, or will it take more time, 2 or even 3 generations? Because it seems that the situation or problem is really deep-rooted, and it can take more time. Thank you.
Haaretz is a newspaper which, one of the few newspapers in the world which appears both in 2 languages on the same day, namely Hebrew, and we have also an English version. Haaretz is the only newspaper in Israel which has paywalls in the internet, both in Hebrew and in English. It was a very courageous and dangerous step that we took. Until now it's quite successfully. So about the readership, it's very clear that Haaretz, the print, the subscribers of the print are rather older people, well established. Haaretz was always a newspaper of the elite, if I may say so. Higher language, higher way of dealing with things, it's not a tabloid. And the readership was always rather small but very influential. and mainly influential also on other newspapers and other journalists, which many times has a lot of role, because not always you influence directly your readers, but you might influence other newspapers. You might higher the standard, you might put issues on the agenda, which if you don't do it, nobody will deal with them. And once you do it, the other media has to deal with those issues as well. Like, for example, the asylum seekers, which in Israel, if Haaretz doesn't deal with them, nobody deals with them. No interest at all. Now, I don't know who are the readers in the internet, because this opens to really new, very new audiences and readerships. I just know that today, with all the social media, your article goes to places that you never imagined before, not only all over the world, but also beyond time. We used to say once that yesterday's newspaper is the oldest thing. Now, yesterday's newspaper is eternal, it's forever, because you can get reactions for an article you wrote 6 years ago. All of a sudden it becomes an issue, because someone found it in the internet, and so by this we really lost any kind of not only control but also knowledge about who will finally write it and who will and when will he read it. I can tell you also that it creates a lot of misinformation. I wrote the article about the pilots, and within hours in all the social media in Israel, people didn't read the article, but they wrote it. I wrote that the Israeli pilots are murderers, which I never wrote, by the way. But this was enough to create all the public scandal. Because, and now I can't prove anymore that I didn't write that they are murderers. Now it's very clear that I wrote that the pilots are murderers, and what was originally written has no relevance anymore. Now it's very clear that I wrote that the Israeli pilots are murderers in the middle of a war, yeah, which makes it worse. Yes, it's a question of generations of change. On the other hand, I must tell you that changes many times in history, and you know it from your own country, can be very quick. Can be very quick. I always remember, when I was a child, we used to burn puppets of Egyptian presidents. And then, in the year of 1977, November 1977, all of a sudden President Anwar Sadat arrives in Israel. Within weeks, there were restaurants named on his name. He became the most popular figure in Israel. Hundreds of thousands of Israelis went to Egypt and were welcomed there with love, real love. And then it all broke down because of many reasons. So I believe that changes, if there will be the leadership who will lead the change, public opinion is something very, very elastic and very, very fragile, and you can shape it quite easily if you come with the right messages.
The next question would be for Jevgeni. Recently, your party had a case with a minister who was accused of several things which she might not have said. Or, you know, this was sort of leaked news from the governmental meeting. Do you think that similar kind of changes, like Levy was describing about the Egyptian president, could also happen to, for example, Rapallo or some other politicians? Can the politicians be fluid in that sense? Is the public opinion that fickle?
I completely agree with what was said about quickly transforming public opinion. But I'm very skeptical that this change in public opinion comes through rational arguments. Therefore, through a lot of different means, including leaked, sentences teared out of context and so on, it is possible to either politically or socially kill somebody, or promote them to a higher status. That is clearly very, very easy to do. But that never happens through rational arguments. At least I can't think of a possibility how that could happen.